Yes, there's George. Okay. Hi, George.
Hello.
George. Hi.
Okay. Well, you want to start there, Janine?
I'm going to start with roll call.
Yep.
Mayor Jacobs,
I am here.
Committeeman Hickey,
Here.
Mr. Strakoff,
Here.
Mr. Travellini,
Here.
Mr. Odelius,
Here.
Mr. Leonard,
Here.
Mr. DiGiovanni,
Here.
Mr. Zupnik,
Present.
Ms. Orabana,
Here.
Mr. Walter,
Here.
Chairwoman Getchell.
Here.
Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board was filed with the Township Clerk, sent to the Bernardsville News and the Courier News and to all subscribers, and posted at the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 12, 2021.
Okay, let's have our flag salute. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
The United States of America.
and to the republic for which it stands,
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty,
liberty, and
justice for all.
Congratulations. That was
Much better.
That was up to the township committee standard now, right?
So long as I stay muted, you're good to go.
Yeah, me too.
very good. That's the best we've done. Practice makes perfect. There we go. Okay, we do have, well, I'll open it up to the public first. If there's anybody on the public that has anything that they would like to say, comments or questions for tonight that's not on the agenda?
Do you want to announce that?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. The application for Alpha Ferry is being postponed. Do we have a date for that, Janine?
No, we do not.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
Madam Chair,
yes.
this is Collins. There was not much communication on this, but I did notice that I had a voicemail from the attorney, Frank Petrino, to my office voicemail, and I picked it up today. He informed me that he had conflicts with his witnesses and therefore was requesting it be carried, and he would like it to be carried to May 13th, not to the May 6th meeting, which I think Paul and I and Janine were thinking of, the May 6th meeting. You don't have, my understanding is you don't technically have anything else scheduled for either meeting yet. So I think it's appropriate to carry it to that date because we could well have a conflict on the 6th of a witness conflict. So I would recommend that, but I'm open to whatever the chair lady wants.
Yeah, well, that's fine with me, May 13th, I guess. I don't see Paul there, but is that okay with you, Paul? Are you there? Yes.
Yeah,
Paul?
I keep clicking the wrong button from you. Yeah, that's fine. I think the other two applications we have probably could be done on May 6th. We'll just have to get the word out to them pretty quickly so they can do their notice.
Okay, good. Okay, so we'll say it's being carried then till May 13th.
Right, and we'll just confirm for the record that the Alfieri 22 Route 206 LLC application has been carried without additional notices to May 13th, 2021 at 7 p.m. And keep checking the website, but it'll probably be a Zoom meeting or remote meeting.
Well, yes, it sounds like we're going to continue Zoom for a while yet, so we'll say that's what we're going to do. Okay, we have minutes to approve. We have first February 4th. We've had an opportunity to look at it, and we need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Did you get that, Janine?
I believe I got Scott and Jeff.
Scott, Jeff, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Does anybody have to, I think everybody's been present for all our meetings, so I think everybody's good to vote, right? Yeah, okay. So that motion has passed for February 4th. We have February 11th. Same.
Motion.
Who's that? Nick or Rich?
That was Rich.
Rich?
Well, I second then.
Second, Nick, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone abstain?
Actually, Lou and Anna were absent for that.
On
one.
that meeting, okay, so we have to,
Long time ago, I don't remember.
yeah, I know.
That's the only reason I know them.
She keeps the records. She's good. We'll keep Janine. February 18th, same thing. We have a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
And Rich. Everyone in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained on that one? Everybody was here for that, Janine?
Everybody was here for that. And just for the record, on the February 4th one, that one, actually Nick was absent for.
Oh,
so
Nick
I'll
was absent on the
so
4th, okay.
Mark that.
Yes, I do remember that. Nick had a blurb there. Okay, so our minutes are approved. Next is the Cannabis Powerpoint, and I think the mayor wants to speak about that. Is that correct?
Correct. So
Okay.
at Monday's meeting, we had a presentation from John Bellardo's law firm with his cannabis team. And they did a presentation on the new cannabis legislation. And at this point, it's not legislation, it's law. And so one part of it was a review of the laws that have been approved and are now in effect, and a review of those laws, the options that municipalities have to open up for cannabis-related industries. And it runs from cultivation to transportation to processing, manufacturing, to I think there's something else. in there. Wholesale.
Sale, retail.
And then retail sales, dispensaries, retail dispensaries themselves. So there's, excuse me, 6 category of licenses that are out there. And there's opportunities for municipalities to approve and say, hey, this is great, bring it on. There's opportunity for municipalities to say no. If municipalities do open the door or take no action, then those municipalities are barred from 5 years. 5 years from making a contrary decision. However, if municipalities affirmatively say, no thanks, not now, the municipalities have the option of opting in and allowing those businesses further down the road. The presentation, I asked that the presentation, certainly the PowerPoint be presented, and it's on the municipal website. I've also asked Robin and Janine and everyone else to distribute the PowerPoint presentation directly to the Land Use Board, to members of the Board of Health, and to the Agricultural Advisory Committee. We will continue to be having discussions at the Township Committee level on the legislation and to assess which direction the municipality, certainly the Township Committee, wants to go in, but we do want to hear from our different boards where it's applicable, what their thoughts are on the legislation and the opportunities presented to the municipalities. Of interest is that we did notice that this presentation was going to be presented and would be available to the public. Actually, we gave that at our last February meeting because that was the first meeting we held after these laws were enacted. So as soon as these laws were enacted, I asked John Bellardo to bring his cannabis team to do a presentation. We discussed it at the last February meeting. And then we sent notice out both on the township website, on Facebook, and I know different township committee members and distributed or reposted on social media that we were having this presentation. And there was no, well, I want to say no, there were two folks who actually expressed comment about the legislation and their thoughts on where the township should go. That was it. Brand new legislation, getting a presentation from state experts on the law and on the business end of the marijuana cannabis industries, and very little public participation in that presentation. But the presentation, once again, is on the website. You guys all have it by email, but also at this point, Monday's meeting is now online, I believe. So the video presentation, if anyone wants to see the video presentation and the Q&A that went back and forth with the attorneys who were doing the presentation, so we got into a little more in-depth on some of those elements. That's available on certainly on the township website. So if folks want to actually see what was discussed in more detail, certainly have that opportunity to do so. There were a few questions that the attorneys were going to do a little more research in, or a little more research on, and they'll come back to Township Committee at our next meeting, or maybe just John Bellardo will do it, or maybe they'll just participate by Zoom and let us know what their additional research was. And if there's another round for additional questions from the Township Committee and any other public, we'll certainly be able to do that. But there's a limited time frame by which municipalities have to act. So that's, August. So August 20, right?
Yeah, that was going to be my question, if you have a time limit
Yeah,
as
there's
to
a
when.
time frame by which we must act, or we will have been deemed approval of the cannabis industries. So a couple quick takeaways from my end is the state is also supposed to, during this time frame, promulgate regulations, right? So those regulations will go into the details of how each of these licenses is going to work, what constraints the state is going to expect of anyone operating one of those licenses, right? So that could get into issues of security, lighting, fencing, hours of operation, all this. And it's not just on the dispensary, but it could also be on the production facilities, the wholesaling, and the distribution. So until those regulations are put out, we don't really know what we would be allowing or disallowing. So to me, that is sort of a critical point, is without the regulations being promulgated, we're sort of, flying blind a little bit here. And that was a sentiment, I think that was expressed by other members of the Township Committee. And I will say, I also had a conversation with our liaison to the governor's office, and I expressed a similar sentiment. Hey, the way this legislation is crafted, you're asking municipalities to make decisions, and without having those regulations in place, we too, are flying blind. And the response from the governor's, our liaison, was, we're hearing that a lot, and we expect that a lot of towns are going to opt out until such time as regulations are in place, and then revisiting once they have a better idea of how these businesses are supposed to operate. But one of the other comments that came up, or certainly questions I asked of Mr. Bellardo, is if the Township Committee decides that we want to opt out, or we want to opt in and we want to draft a ordinance to that effect, or we want to opt out for some and opt in for other businesses, is that going to be treated as a public safety ordinance or as a zoning ordinance? And in Mr. Bellardo's opinion, that these would in fact be zoning ordinances that would require referral back to the land use board. So one of the reasons why I wanted the land use board to get a copy of the PowerPoint, and I urge you, if you can, to please look at the township website for the video of the presentation. So eventually, one way or the other, because we're not going to let that timeline lapse, right? We're not, that time frame, that August deadline is not going to go by without Bedminster Township Committee taking some form of action. But whatever form of action we take will come back to the land use board for a consistency review. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, I just have the one question now. So we can pick and choose the businesses we might want. We don't have to take nothing or all. We can pick and choose
Yes.
businesses. Okay.
Yes, and that if you run through the presentation, there's some things that we can't regulate, right? You can't outlaw it, right? You can't outlaw the consumption.
Right,
Things
we
that are-
understand that, right?
Things that are within town control might be
The distribution
public
or
property,
the
for example,
retail.
consumption on public property.
Mhm,
Yeah, that's something that the township could adopt local ordinance.
mhm.
The other thing we can't prohibit is distribution into the town. So imagine there's an Uber Eats for marijuana. You can't prohibit the distribution or the deliveries into your town.
Mhm.
You may be able to say you don't want the distribution business to be located here. So
The
that's
retail,
No,
the
no,
retail.
I'm just saying that even the distribution.
Okay,
So
okay.
the company that's going to operate a fleet of vehicles to do
Distribution.
distribution,
Mhm.
you can say, okay, that's not something that we're going to allow within the zoning. You can certainly also say we're not going to allow zoning for dispensaries.
Mhm.
You could say we will allow zoning for retail dispensaries, but we don't want the grow facilities. You could say we want the grow facilities or will permit the grow facilities, but no way do we want dispensaries.
Mhm.
Area question.
Question from Scott.
So with our, notably agrarian economy, what if one of our landowners west of the highway decides they want to set aside a parcel to grow some of this stuff? Is that going to come before us too, or can he just do it? It's agricultural.
Well,
Depends on the ordinance.
it's interesting in the legislation, cultivation cannot take place on farmland assessed property. So, when you talk about
So even if it's not farmland, let's say you have, you're not selling hay and you're not.
just go on a little bit more on that issue, because we actually got into some degree of detail on that very topic, because certainly from the township committee, we recognize that, 80% of the town is of some
Farm.
rural characteristics with agriculture. And there very well could be property owners who's got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 acres. They might want to run a cultivation facility.
They usually got to file a state land management plan anyway for the tax benefits that are available.
So once again, you cannot do a grow facility on farmland assessed property. And when we asked that question, the attorneys mentioned, well, in part because the legislature was viewing this not so much as an agricultural activity, but akin to a commercial activity, highly profitable. So they were saying, the state can't justify giving a tax abatement or a farmland assessment
Mhm.
At the same time that there's going to be, what's
High
considered a
profit.
highly profitable cultivation facility
Makes sense.
on that land.
Mhm.
So that does impact, a fair amount of the Bedminster property. A follow-up question that we had was, okay, let's say you've got farmland preserved property. So not necessarily assessed, right, which is a property tax issue, but farmland preserved. Would a grow facility be considered agricultural for purposes of farmland preservation? That's one of the questions that the attorneys are supposed to come back to us with additional details. But also following up on the regulations. So if we allow grow facilities, do we know what type of security? Are they going to require fencing? Are they going to require regular fencing, barbed wire fencing, 10-foot fencing, lights, cameras? What sort of security components will be required for those grow facilities? So until those regs are issued, you're just not sure what it's going to be. Are you going to even be allowed to have outdoor grow facilities? Will they have to be inside? And if they're inside, once again, what sort of structure do you need? What sort of security? What sort of lighting, cameras? What are you going to need out there?
Larry, do we have any guidance as to how the not yet promulgated regulations might dovetail with our current zoning ordinances? So if we say we might be willing to let cultivating facilities in here in town, and the regs come out and say you need, bright lights and barbed wire fences that are 20 feet tall, which you can't have in the agricultural district, do we know how that might play out?
We do not.
Yeah.
Okay.
We do not, which is why to some extent you're like, okay, maybe,
I was going to say enforcement's going to be,
Yeah.
enforcement's going to be interesting if somebody's got 60 acres and they, set apart 2 acres somewhere and they start growing stuff in the middle of nowhere in their property. How is anybody ever going to enforce that?
Well, we asked about that question too. So the way it's supposed to work is you get the seed over here. You get the plants and the cultivation over here. You've got a distribution company that's going to go from cultivation to the manufacturing processing facility. Then you may have a separate distribution from the processing facility to the dispensary. And it's supposed to be tracked, right? One can't go, right? You're not supposed to, if you're growing 2 acres, you should be doing that right now.
I guess they're not going to be going local right to the farmer's market, I guess.
If you're going to be consuming legal marijuana from a legal licensed dispensary, that dispensary needs a chain of custody that shows where they got it from on a wholesale basis. The wholesaler needs to have a chain of custody that it was distributed properly, and the distribution company has to have chain of custody that brings it back to the cultivator.
How does this become law without all of these details being resolved?
Yeah, no kidding.
Okay, we are not taking rhetorical questions.
Right. So,
That's the like,
We won't go there.
Larry, I have a question. Maybe Paul can answer this question. Do we have any properties on the west side of Bedminster that are probably 5 acres or more that are not farm assessed and or farm preservation?
I'm certain that there are.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's,
Residential homes, I would assume.
and
Is it
Lou,
now legal to grow your own?
no, it is not.
So grow your own is, the legislation is actually pending.
Thought it was under 2 ounces
You're right.
annually.
Grow your own would, the current legislation that's out there I believe is for 6 plants.
But it hasn't been adopted yet.
Has not been enacted yet.
And-
It's interesting because frankly, Colin and I were putting our, business hats on and going, to some extent, does that undermine the process that the state just permitted? Because at some point, if you've got grow your own, do you still need
Yeah, right.
the dispensaries and everything else? And the other thing is, by the way, I do want to point out, which I should mention earlier, is that municipalities can have a surcharge tax on all those
Different
all those
businesses.
different opportunities, right? From cultivation to retail dispensary, there's opportunity for taxation along the way. So if you do permit cultivation, but don't permit dispensaries, you can put a tax on what's being sold from the cultivator to the manufacturer wholesaler.
Is that 2% tax?
I think it goes up to 2% on top of whatever the state sales and use tax is. Once again, your questions, go to the PowerPoint. It should all be laid out there.
So Larry, I have another question. Have you been able to discuss this with any of the, our neighbor townships? Is this something that's come up in other towns, and have any thought on how they're looking at this?
I can tell you, I've had discussions with Matt Mensch from Bridgewater, and Bridgewater intends on not allowing dispensaries and probably not allowing any of the other licenses at this time.
With the option later. Is that basically, yeah. Yeah, without regulations, I mean, how do you know?
Right, and
I mean,
one of the one public comment from a Mr. Garcia, who actually showed up at an earlier meeting, at the last February meeting, and he made a comment, I think that I echoed as well, and I think Colin echoed. If the surrounding towns don't allow dispensaries and Bedminster does, or Bedminster fails to act in time, in which case they are presumed permitted, then, Bedminster will be sort of the hole in the donut that allows it when it's surrounded by other towns that don't allow it. The other thing that I mentioned and I think other committee members talked about as well is 78, 287, 202, 206. There's a whole lot of roads that would bring folks into to Bedminster, and that's something that we need to consider when we make a decision on allowing or not allowing at this time.
Just think, Tom, the growth corridor could become the green corridor.
Richard, you're not allowed to call it a corridor because
That's right.
that's against zoning
I
principles.
know.
So we're not
That's
really a
what-
corridor.
You can't
It
call
doesn't-
it a corridor, but it will become the green corridor.
It doesn't exist in the state plan. You can't have a corridor.
So
Farmers
Larry,
market could be busy from far and wide.
Larry, do you have a timeline for us, for the township committee, for the board, for decision-making process, any kind of timeline?
So what we were looking at is essentially backing off the August deadline and trying to look at meeting dates and establish, okay, so if August, once again, I'm making this right. I thought it was the 20th or 21st, 22nd, something like that.
Saturday.
So then if we work backwards, how many meetings do we have? Regularly scheduled township meetings and regularly scheduled land use board meetings that if we were to take action, that we would need to do so. I think Doug Stevenson and I both agreed that, we ought to look at June, early June to, set a course for making a decision.
Because it would have to come to the land use board and then back to township committee for ordinance.
Yeah,
correct?
since this would be,
Yes.
since this would be a zoning ordinance, this would require, obviously introduction, referral to the land use board,
Yeah.
and then the second read and public hearing.
Back to township committee.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Question. If we opt out when can you go, just to give us more time, could we then I think August is the deadline, in September, October, after reviewing, say, okay, we're gonna allow on this and this. Can you do it that soon, or do you have to then, wait another year before you can opt in?
I believe you have the opportunity. I think what we heard from Melissa Riley was you had the opportunity to opt in whenever you want.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's a great way of not being rushed, just say I opt out, but that gives you time to really spend time and think about what you want to do.
That is correct.
Okay.
And once again, I'm just going to say it was interesting that when I spoke to to our liaison at the governor's office, and I threw that out as an option, he was like, yeah, that's a great idea. So even the governor's office, which has been pushing this all along, was like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Hey, you're not rushed. Yeah.
Hey, Larry and Tom, from an ordinance perspective, if we do nothing, isn't our ordinance set up where if it isn't a permitted use, it's prohibited?
Good question, Rich, but that's what this statute does, flips on its ear. In other words, unlike the medical marijuana statute, which required affirmative consent by the municipality and zoning to be created by the municipality that wanted it, this statute basically says all prior statutes about cannabis are void, and a municipality loses its right to regulate these uses, the six or so listed uses, and it preempts local ordinances and says, if you don't act by August 21st to either regulate or prohibit them, then cultivation, wholesale, distribution, they're all allowed as permitted uses in any industrial zones. And retail sales are all allowed in any commercial zones. And it says as a conditional use, which is a very odd phrase for a statute to say, because a conditional use has to have an ordinance that sets up for what the conditions are. But a conditional use is basically a permitted use. So what the statute does, it totally preempts your zoning on this subject and says that they're permitted, just like Larry explained before.
Okay.
But if you do adopt this ordinance.
Hey, Tom, I just want to point out to, since I noticed that Jake is here. So Jake Perry, Bedminster ran that presentation in a public forum with public notice. We noticed you weren't there, but it is available online, both the PowerPoint and on the video for the full presentation. So, it's a similar presentation. I know that other towns have done, but I think other towns have done them not in a public forum. So I do want to point out that we decided that we were going to, frankly, I wanted to hear from the public one way or the other, right?
Sure.
Because, Colin, do you have the numbers that Bedminster overall voted in favor of legalization? Right. So when the referendum was put to the public, as a municipality, Bedminster voted in favor of it. Now that does not necessarily mean that's regarding consumption, not necessarily, hey, do we want a dispensary, next to the Kings or next to the Fresh Market or, on Main Street, right? So we from Township Committee wanted to hear, all right, let's run this, right? Let's run this in a public forum, get some folks out and see if folks are going to be, vehement one way or the other, or get some sort of idea of what the sentiment was. We had two commenters and both were opposed to having any of the licenses in Bedminster at this time.
Yet we have to act constructively to prohibit or limit these functionalities or opportunities.
Correct. And so the way that the most interesting thing was the micro business, right? Because I frankly, I've been following this, but I did not understand that municipalities could allow unlimited micro businesses, right? So you could do a small quarter acre or maybe less than that. I forget what the square footage for micro business cultivator would, but you could allow 20 of them, 50 of them. Yeah. once again, I think the more this comes, if towns really go in that route, you can almost end up with really depressing the pricing,
Mhm. Interesting.
because you may just flood the market
With the
with,
market.
because you're going to have so many people that have availability and accessibility to actually cultivate the product.
Not a repeat
But-
business.
Larry, should we also mention the consumption questions we got? And since we have a bunch of condo board presidents on the line,
Oh, yeah, right.
My mouth gone.
we had questions about, well, what about my neighbor who currently stands on his porch or his deck and smokes cigarettes? Will he still smoke marijuana? And I don't want that, wafting into my house or impacting my kids. And we did some follow-up. Now, that is not under the purview of this legislation, but condo boards will have to decide whether or not they want to enact something to preclude that or not in terms of consumption. And that's up to you guys.
Oh, interesting. Colin.
Yeah, there's no time limit on that, right, Colin?
Right, no time limit on that. That's not subject to the 180-day rule.
Okay.
Question, aren't there also restrictions on who can get these different licenses? I saw that they're really going to push, there's a certain, I guess, amount that have to go to certain depressed areas that I guess were most affected by drugs in the past. Tom, I mean.
That's correct. But that's actually, the one you're thinking of, that's actually a promotion and a special tax revenue sharing to those municipalities. All licenses have to be approved by the state and this new agency that is being formed. And those licenses, the person who gets that license must meet the standards of the statute, which are pretty restrictive. Supposedly also, a municipality has to approve the licenses and can somehow approve some. After you deal with zoning, it could perhaps somehow approve some and not approve others, which sounds a little unbelievable, to tell you the truth, but that's what it supposedly allows.
But doesn't a large percentage of those licenses have to go into those, whatever, I thought it was either 12 or 18 areas?
Well, but there's no restriction really yet on any of them. There's a goal, but there could be an awful lot of licenses throughout the state. But we don't know yet how many licenses they have.
Based upon, some of what I've learned and the presentation itself, is that you have a distinction between these micro businesses, which are not subject by number, right? So that could be completely at the discretion of the municipality. So you could run these micro businesses, which are then set up, I think it's based upon income, square footage, and I think there might be another consideration. But that would be separate and apart from the goals that Tom mentioned, and Tim, this is probably what you're thinking about, because originally the idea is that you were going to direct some of these facilities to the urban areas where the drug or the policing of drugs has been viewed as disproportionate.
Yep.
So that is certainly a goal. Once the commission and the regulations start coming out, it may fine tune where those facilities are going to go and which municipalities or urban areas get prioritized for the larger permits. But what we were told from the presentation, that micro businesses might be unlimited.
Right. I think we saw 37 large cultivation licenses, of which I think 10 were already kind of earmarked for certain municipalities.
Right.
And then the other would be up for grabs. But as Larry said, the micro business, it's unlimited.
Colin, go back to the homeowners association for a minute. You're saying that the homeowners association could ban the smoking of this marijuana?
In theory, the consumption both internally and externally.
Sounds like a challenge to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I would think anything a board has to pass would have to be approved by their membership too.
Well, besides that, if we banned it and it's legal then there's a challenge right there.
Yeah, I don't see
There's
that.
no enforcement.
I can't see that standing up.
And remember, consumption is not just smoking, it's also, there's gummies, there's
Yeah,
tinctures,
and
there's-
eating, and
bacon,
yeah, I
there's
know, I understand that.
It's a whole spectrum.
I understand.
Colin, you seem to know a lot about this.
He's got college kids.
A little too much, Colin.
I guess I gotta be the first one to use it.
Big stick.
Interesting
Not
stuff.
only a president, he's also applying.
Any more questions from the board?
I just want to tell Tim, there's a slide by John Bilardo's office called impact zones, and it has what you're talking about the sort of the percentages that have to go to those impact zone cities and towns.
Okay,
And, it's 25% have to go to those, and at least two licenses have to go to each impact zone. So it encourages it there, but it doesn't prevent it in the other places. So
Okay.
it's,
all right, thank you.
Okay, anyone else from the board have any more questions? I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about this coming up in the future, so we'll have plenty of questions again. Okay, Paul, we want to talk about Oaks developers.
Excuse me, yes, that was the application for conversion of previously approved site where there's two buildings on the site now in Pluckerman, and they were converting into modifying the building to create residential units. They submitted an application. It was very significantly incomplete. There's many documents that are missing. So I wrote a letter basically saying that it's recommended that the board formally take action to determine the application incomplete.
Okay, so we need a motion for that, to deny it at this time?
But determine it incomplete. Not
In-
deny it.
Yeah, to determine it incomplete.
I'll make the motion. Seconded.
You got that, Jenny?
George and Scott.
Okay, and I think we need a roll call on that.
Mayor Jacobs?
Is this a Board of Adjustment matter for Colin and I?
Yes, it is a use variance.
Board of-
you're all, the D variance.
It's a D. Okay, so you and Colin are out.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Mr. Strackoff?
Approved.
Mr. Travellini?
Approved.
Mr. Rodelius?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. DiGiovanni?
Aye.
Mr. Zupnik?
Aye.
Ms. Sorabana?
Anna?
She's muted.
She might be
She might be frozen.
Yeah.
Sounds like-
We're only alternates anyway.
Now.
Now,
Mr.
now.
Walter?
My
Aye.
count tonight.
Aye.
Chairwoman Gutschall?
Aye.
And I can ask Anna if she logs back on right now. It looks like she is off.
Probably an internet connection.
Okay.
Yeah.
Never happens in Bedminster.
Okay, so it's approved to be incomplete.
All right.
Okay, now we're on to the plan endorsement. And I think we're back to the mayor again. Is that correct? Or,
Sure.
yes?
So in a prior discussion, Frank was talking about proceeding with plan endorsement for Pluckman Center and Bedminster Center. And I think there's a couple to-do items that the state plan or the state planning office was asking. And some of the steps are, somewhat involved. And before we bring this to the township committee, certainly one of the questions that is going to be asked by, I would think, every member of the township committee is going to be, what's the benefit of getting plan endorsement? And I know Frank went back to the state planning office, and they identified a couple prioritization on some loan programs, but frankly, those are loan programs we would not ever be really applicable to Bedminster. So I asked Frank to go back again and, so if you could find something that actually, makes it worthwhile for us to go through those efforts. So I put it on for new business, and I'm not sure, is anyone in Frank's office on this call?
No, Frank, no, he,
Okay,
yeah.
I thought Frank at one point was going to send,
He was, but then he asked me, and
it's okay.
the agenda hadn't changed yet. And then we
Okay.
had changed the agenda, and put this on here, so it was too late to then do. So
Okay.
we can talk about it again.
Yeah, we
at
can talk
another-
about it. So I know Paul has some thoughts on this, and Tom, you may as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize a couple of benefits that are somewhat intangible. One is that village centers and town centers, they overcome that corridor argument that the state always tries to use back on towns like Bedminster. And they become a useful tool in planning to be able to defend your ordinances in particularly Mount Laurel litigation. And that worked very well. And also in challenges to your zoning, the R10 zoning challenge was in one part substantially benefited by you having not only followed the state plan, but actually obtained plan endorsement of your entire municipal master plan. You are one of the few municipalities in New Jersey that has plan endorsement of your entire municipal master plan, even to the point where your R10 zone, which the state put into a planning area 4A for agriculture, you convinced the state to put into a planning area 5 for environmentally sensitive. And that was helpful in defending the 10-acre plus, basically effectively 17 to 20 acre zoning of the western part of the municipality. So can I tell you that it's a great winner for that kind of case? No, but I can tell you as an attorney that does this, that was very helpful to your defense counsel, Howard Cohen, when you defended the R10 zone district. That being said, it also helps you say something very significantly too, which is that your Mount Laurel numbers should be lower because you are endorsed by the State Planning Commission and because your only areas of activity at all that are sewered are the centers, meaning the acreage devoted to developable land and the crazy calculations used by the courts for Mount Laurel numbers based upon formulas that started in the 1980s and have been resurrected by the courts now, devote very little developable land left in your areas of centers, which are called areas of growth under the state plan. And thereby you get to get a much lower number. So this is a direct result of being of following the state plan the way you have. Is that intangible? Yes, but it's an intangible factor that I find particularly useful in land use litigation. Not only because it's a good planning technique, but because it makes sense. It's rational. It has a sound basis, and that is something that is very helpful in defending zoning against challenges. And by the way, these challenges, you haven't faced too many, or you haven't faced them recently, but the towns that are losing the challenges realize that there's almost no limit on builder's remedy claims and numbers of units that people seek on the most pristine farmland that you could ever imagine. So it's a good thing to be consistent with the state plan. It's a great thing to be fully endorsed. And it's a great thing to have your centers be endorsed and limited. Okay. But I also think Paul could help us too. I think that these do help you with points for DOT grants. The points for grants are kind of a game, but seeking a grant for something in the town center enhances the number of points you get in a grant application for a DOT grant, like for road improvement, perhaps a bikeway, perhaps a bike bridge. I don't know how you got those fantastic bridges, but I'm sure the points didn't hurt there. And they're sort of like, is it going to get you millions of dollars? No, but it gets you an enhanced chance of obtaining a grant. So that's just it's sort of intangible too. But we all know the state of New Jersey doesn't give money to suburban municipalities for much anyway. So that's the reality, and that's not going to change.
Tim, you have a question there?
Well, before we go to questions, I'd rather hear
Go right ahead.
from Paul.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Yes, go ahead, Paul. You're
Sure, let me start backwards as it relates to grants. Tom, I'd have to disagree. I don't believe that there really are any points that make a difference. I don't have any municipalities that have plan endorsement and every single one of them gets a DOT road grant every year. So I'm not quite sure that I would worry about getting grant money. Basically, I wouldn't do it for the grant money. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'll tell you, we got them in Sparta. We got them in Sparta for streetscape improvements for sidewalks, streetlights, and street furniture. But I agree with you that it's.
Yeah, I've gotten the same.
How many people is
Long Hill, Chester, Hopewell Borough? None of them have been through the process. I'm a box top planner. I sent my box tops in as an engineer, and I that's how I got my planning license. So I don't consider myself an authority on the subject. I just know, like I said, in my experience, I don't know any towns that I work for that have been through the process, and that's about 20.
okay. Thanks, Paul. Okay, Tim.
I have two questions. I feel like a political reporter, but the first one is if we do have our master plan endorsement, number one, why doesn't that apply to our centers? And then secondly, it would
but the only way you get your centers extended now is to also get plan endorsement. It's amazing
for the centers.
It's for your entire master plan, but the only way that any municipality gets a center extension is if their entire master plan is endorsed as well. You have extensions of all three things, your two centers and the endorsement. It's still active, and you're in the process to get that extension, and you probably will get it pretty easily because, quite frankly, Pluckerman Village and Bedminster Village didn't disappear. They still are centers, and there's nothing changed in the state plan for Bedminster. So if they endorsed your master plan once in 2006, I think it is, the reality is they didn't change their plan, and your plan is better than their plan, so you'll be endorsed.
So why wouldn't we just extend it? Does it involve a lot of work? Is that why we're talking about it?
Yeah, you are seeking to extend it and reapprove it, and it doesn't involve that much work. What it involves is, but it's a step, and it's a step where the mayor appoints a plan endorsement advisory committee of a couple of citizens plus some members of the planning board and the township committee. They work with Frank to prepare a draft document called a Municipal Self-Assessment Report, an MSA. That report, quite frankly, is going to say you were endorsed once, you're still consistent with the same state plan. Your plan should be extended and approved and endorsed again. And by the way, you want us to do some proofs that our floodplains are adequately protected. Here's our updated floodplain ordinance, and here's our mapping to show that we're taking floodplain areas out of the center. And pretty much you get approval. That's my expectation. You actually already have a couple of things. You have what's called a Safe Streets resolution adopted by the Township Committee already. That's one of the things they want towns to do. You already did it years ago. So you're like an easy one. You get check, check, mark, mark, and you're probably done. And but you do have to do that appointment, and you do have to do that report.
Tom, I thought they also wanted us to adopt a couple ordinances.
They will. There'll be. I think there's going to be something to do with floodplain management, but you're probably going to be required to do that anyway. And there probably will be some other ordinances. I don't think there's anything. We haven't heard anything that's really problematic.
There was a sustainability, a
resilience
one, and there was they started stacking some requirements that were going a little astray of just straight planning. And Janine is handing me a piece of paper. Those were all the things that were still. Maybe said pick up. Yeah, so there's a fair amount of some stuff here. So it's not, some of this we may have, but some of it may require drafting new ordinances. And, it may involve a fair amount of just planning work for Frank and, at some expense, right? It's going to assemble this list together. And, as the liaisons to the land use board, Colin and I have to be able to explain to the township committee why we're going through these steps.
Understood.
Oh, there's another, there's more.
Another paper.
Figure out which ones are the most important.
Yeah, I mean, and to Tim's question, we had actually started this process. And the first, I think, step was a conference call, or was a meeting. Actually, it was supposed to be an in-person meeting, but it ended up being a video meeting with folks from the state planning office. Man, that was
About a year ago.
It was about a year. It was early COVID.
Yep.
That's how I got it. I don't use months anymore. I just go early. It might have been March, April last year.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, because it was us and Frank and Tom and
Yep.
The guys from DEP, and DEP is interesting. DEP had more, I would say, I don't want to say onerous requirements than the planning office did. So once again, it shows you, where the muscle is. The muscle is with DEP, not necessarily with the planning office.
Right. Well, I'll give you an example of what they want. They want resiliency in studies. You don't really have that kind of flooding problem that the shore communities have, but that's just become like a statewide thing to have flood analysis and resiliency protection analysis. They also But frankly, if you noticed, I think you should have seen that recently was adopted a statute by the state of New Jersey, your wonderful legislature, just declaring that if and when you update your land use element, your master plan, you must include a resiliency study. So it's just, the state keeps doing things independent of you and independent even of the state planning commission, to basically compel you to take preemptive uniform standards throughout the state. Another one you just did was you did a stormwater management ordinance update required by April regulations of the DEP from last year postponed to their effective date until March 2nd of this year, and you had to adopt it. So my only point would be, you sort of already are one of the fully endorsable towns anyway. So my recommendation is to try to get it. I think it's in your interest as a municipality that has the endorsement and to be able to defend your ordinances. Do you absolutely need it? No, you don't need it.
Anything more from the board? Any questions? Again, I guess we'll hear more about that from Township Committee as
Right.
things progress.
Right.
Okay, and you'll decide what direction we're going to go. Okay. I'm going to open it up to the board right now. Does anybody have anything they'd like to talk about that's not on the agenda?
I do.
Yes, Lou.
Okay, so one quick question and then a comment statement. First question is, Larry, did Elite Properties ever get back to us about a site visit?
I traded emails with them, when we were looking the first time around, but then we got the snow. I've been driving by, looking at the site, trying to determine, what would be a good time. Tom Powers from Elite said, these next couple of weeks were good. And then I know, so the initial group, I think Thursday mornings were still the preference. Is that?
I believe so.
That's good for me.
Paul was included, I think, in that, wasn't it?
Right. And Paul, we want to get you out there too as well.
Right, and I'm always in town on Thursday mornings anyway.
Yeah,
Okay. So
yeah.
Paul, I know you're heading out for, are you heading out next week or is it the following week?
It's next week.
So next Thursday is not good?
Next Thursday will not be good, no.
Okay. How about the following Thursday?
The following Thursday will be fine.
Okay. So I'll target, I will target.
I think you had 4 people.
22nd?
I think that's right.
I think you had 4 board members, Larry.
I'm on that list as well.
Yeah, Scott, Lou.
Never 5, okay?
We had 4, I believe, from the board.
And never 4 out of the zoning board on this one, because this was a zoning board matters.
If you don't go with the first group with the mayor, we will have a second group go. So don't, be concerned. We'll have another group where we have another 4 board members go.
And so for anyone who hasn't gone by, steel is up on the
Foundation's up and.
well, the foundation is up.
Yep.
But steel is now up. So I would imagine they should be going to wood framing soon.
Yeah. They've got great weather and they're beyond that snow. They've really done well.
Yeah.
You want to rent, start in September.
Yeah.
Okay, Carol, so I have a comment.
Yes.
I just want to put it on everyone's radar. There's some talk up here in Pottersville section of town that people are concerned because I don't know if you've heard, but Purnell School will be closing. And Purnell School's property is going to be put up for sale, if it not has already been put up for sale. And it's 85 acres of beautiful land. So I don't know if Larry or anyone in town has heard anything about that. I have heard a little buzz that some realtors are looking at the properties. So I just wanted to kind of put it out there because it could be something that really pops up on our radar screen in the next several months or year.
So Lou, I've actually had meetings with the chair of the current board of Purnell. And I can tell you that their primary concern right now is trying to find another school
Oh, that'd be great.
that would be interested in starting operations there.
That would be
So
wonderful.
not necessarily continuing the Purnell school,
Mhm.
but perhaps starting this as a new location for a school.
That would be wonderful.
And then that, right, that's all I can tell you.
Okay, that's great. That would be the best of all outcomes.
Agreed. And just, to put folks to ease their concerns a bit, it is in the Highlands Preservation Area.
Mhm.
So they are automatically, this is not fair game for a developer. There's a whole lot of constraints that anyone looking to do something on that property would be forced to deal with. And those are not easily overcome, those requirements and constraints.
Thank you, Larry.
Anyone else on the board have anything? Yes, Scott.
Madam Chairman, thank you. I actually had an opportunity to sit in on an EEC meeting last month, and it was a really interesting discussion about our pond located just off of Route 202, 206, and the bike and hike trail and the river there by AT&T. And come to light that actually is an accident of the development of the highway, but it's actually a resource that for not a lot of money, according to our expert who's been in there for the last several years, could actually be improved and probably preserved for years going down the road without any sort of serious money. And when I talk about serious money, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. For a minimal investment of under $10,000 a year, it could probably become a resource for the residents of our town, with minimal upkeep by that company and our DPW. So I just wanted to chime in as a resident and a member of this board as to the work that the EEC is doing. And I've got the ear of two committee members right here, so I thought I would chime in with my 2 cents. So thank you for your time and attention.
Anybody else? Okay. We have Lamington Farm Golf Club that is still being postponed. Is that something that we should be postponing, or is that sort of a dead issue? Do we know? Have we heard anything on that?
We have not heard, Madam Chair. I don't know if we want to reach out to find out if they want to withdraw it or have it dismissed without prejudice. I don't quite know what their status is. I don't know if you want us to follow up or not.
Well, I think we should, rather than just continue to carry and we don't know anything about it. So maybe just reaching out to them and just see where they stand.
I can do that.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Okay, so 20 Route 206, we know that's postponed. That's now going to be on the 13th. We have some other applications. I guess, Paul, you want to talk to us about them? B&D Associates, we'll start with that.
B&D Associates is still basically on hold. They're determining whether or not they're going to come back. I will tell you that I had a phone call from their attorney who says they have a potential tenant who would rent space in the building and use the barn for storage. So I think that would solve all their problems. My guess is they're not going to withdraw the application until that lease is signed, but I think that's probably where they're at.
Okay, so we're just postponing it for the time being.
Right.
We're not going to schedule it at all for now.
Right.
Okay. 46 Spook Hollow.
That's an application for a large farm property. There are multiple accessory dwelling units on it. The proposal is to make some modifications and expand one of those accessory dwelling units. That would be the expansion of a pre-existing non-conforming use. D-variance application. I've done a preliminary review. It looks like it would be complete, and my suggestion would be to schedule it for completeness and a hearing on May 6th.
Not heard. Just
Subject to them being actually deemed complete in the final review of the documentation. Tentatively schedule it for them.
And the Fahey 1200 Copperwith Road.
That's an application for setback variances associated with a pool and a tennis court in a front yard along Copperthwaite Road. Again, that one seems to be complete, and I would suggest that we tentatively schedule that for the same night as well.
I didn't hear the end, Paul. What did you say?
It's I would suggest that you schedule it for the same night, May 6th for
May
completeness.
6th, okay. Okay. Okay, that's all we have. So we need a motion to adjourn.
So
Rick
moved.
and Scott. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Night, everybody.
Bye.
Be safe.
That's that.